When they started printing money like crazy in early 2009, people, oh my God, they're going to create inflation. No, we've only seen inflation recently. I'll get to that in a minute. What we saw was financial asset inflation.
In today's video, Harry Dent, author of 0 Hour, talks about what's up with bonds, the next moves of the Fed, the raging inflation and the coming recession. Dent has been predicting a great reset of the biggest financial asset bubble in history. The market historian predicted a painful crash in stocks and an economic depression, and discusses the next moves before the big crash. He believes that the top is in and the Fed is tightening aggressively. Could the markets make a new high? Before listening to him, please ensure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel.
And this is the reason that we have seen what I call monetary meth. Now, that's my latest term, okay? We're living in monetary meth. Ever since the 2008 financial crisis and early 2009, I mean, the economy this was the worst downturn we've seen since the Great Depression, and at least relatively on par with 80 to 82. I mean, so this was a shock. We got spoiled. And so governments reacted, and what they did was they just said, well, we got to do it. They just printed money. The US government printed $1 trillion right there in 2009, that first year. And you know what? I would have said yes to that. We're in a deep downturn. Yes, you want things to restructure. You want business to get more efficient. You want to knock out zombie companies and unproductive debts. That's a very fruitful thing that economists don't really recognize. Okay, they don't like recession. But you don't want recessions to get crazy and get out of control because they can build them. So that first trillion, yes. After that, monetary meth. We've been living in this whole new world. And I'll tell you what, and I learned this from Dr. Lacey Hunt. If you ever get to listen to him, if you ever hear him talking, listen to this guy. He is a PhD economist, okay? And a damn good one. And he's the guy who first explained money velocity to me way back in, I think, the late 80s or something. He says it shows how productively you're investing money. Money, once you invest it, will only continue to grow if you make profits and continue to reinvest profitably. If it doesn't, it'll take more and more money to create less and less and less. Well, guess what the money velocity's been doing since 1997, right when the bubble started, the first tech bubble, 95 to 2000, okay? Bubbles are always a sign of speculative and unproductive investment, and that sort of stuff, okay? That's when money velocity started to drop like a rock. It is still dropping into 2022. That is the telltale indicator. And bubbles always see this, and bubbles always have the biggest crashes because the investment is so unproductive, and because bubbles encourage people to just invest wildly and financial assets go crazy, okay? And that's what we've seen. When they started printing money like crazy in early 2009, people, oh my God, they're going to create inflation. No, we've only seen inflation recently. I'll get to that in a minute. What we saw was financial asset inflation. Financial assets today, I've just been researching this in depth and updating everything, close to $600 trillion. That's the biggest economic number in the world. And if you compare that to global GDP at 94 trillion in 2021, that is 6.4 times GDP. No, does that mean anything? No, not unless you look at history. Historically, 2 times GDP is normal for that, and 3 is as high as it's gotten generally before this. So this is saying we're way out of that. This indicator, money velocity, is telling us it's dropping like a rock, that we're investing money unproductively, and that's going to eventually cause worse and worse investments, harder and harder to pay back the debts you borrow, and that's what causes a major downturn like the 1930s. We have not seen a downturn. Even in the 70s, that was a generational slowdown in spending, okay? And it was inflation, which is bad for markets, but it wasn't the Great Depression. Stocks went down 89%, the Dow. which would be more like the NASDAQ today. 89% in that Great Depression crash, okay? Way more than we've seen, even at the worst so far, okay? So, what really drives generational demographic cycles, technology cycles, and what we've seen in recent years, right on prediction. I said back in the 80s, along with Sir John Templeton, he was the only guy as bullish as me. He really had his finger on globalization, and I had my finger on the emerging baby boom around the world. We were the most bullish guys back then, okay? That is over. You know, the more I study, and I have studied a lot. I really took off 7 or 8 years while I was doing business consulting in the 80s and just studied everything in history. I read like 10 volumes of the history of Western civilization. This was like tens of thousands of pages because I just wanted to really get as good a picture of what happens over time. How does life evolve? What occurs? And the one thing you cannot miss, absolutely cannot miss, is cycles. But there's big cycles and there's small cycles. And what that really always comes down to me, the longer I live and the more I study everything, not just economics, but anything I study, it really everything about life is about the play of opposites. In the economy, it's inflation to deflation, boom to bust. In real life, male and female, okay? We're alike, but we're very different. Success and failure. Let me tell you something. You know what the secret to success is? A guy said this, a speaker said this once, and I love it. He said, success is going enthusiastically from failure to failure. And I'm like, that's genius. That's the play of opposites demonstrated in one sentence. Success cannot happen without failure and vice versa. Because what's so good about failure? When you fail, you really dig in. You're forced to dig in, re-examine everything. What did I do wrong? How can I get out of this mess? Now, when you're doing well and your business is succeeding, your life or love life is succeeding, you just kind of cruise along. Hey, that's fine, that's fun, but it's not great for innovation. I am telling you, no question in my mind. I ask these people I meet all the time, what did you learn the most from? Your successes or your failures? And people usually have to stop for a second, but they almost always say failures. And no question for me. You know, my first failure was, I was interested in economics naturally, you know? So I go into college and stuff, and I'm majoring in economics. Wrong, okay? After the third course, I'm like, this is the most obtuse, vague, theoretical topic I could have chosen. There's nothing solid to grab on here. And I just happened to have a really good finance professor. He died a couple of years ago, but man, I've been friends with him for the rest of his whole life. Dick Nuttall. And boy, he made finance interesting. And so what I did, I said, economics is dull, doesn't teach me much, I'm not learning much. So I took accounting, which all my father's successful business friends, he was in politics, but he had a lot of successful business friends that donated to the political cause. And they all told me, oh, we wish we'd have taken accounting and finance, you know? So I took that in undergraduate, and then I took marketing and management. What I really, when I realized economics wasn't talking to me, really didn't seem to have much to offer, I ended up saying, okay, well, I'll study business. Well, that was a great mistake to choose, because that's how you can understand the economy without understanding business and consumers. How do people operate? What do they buy? Why do they buy? When do they spend the most money? It ends up, that's one of the most predictable things on earth. It took me till 1982 to discover, oh my gosh, we know when people spend money. They enter the workforce at age 20. They grow in their skills and experience and their salaries and wages. And the average person, not everybody, the average person peaks at 46. The whole boom we saw, the greatest boom in history from late 82 into late 2007 was the baby boomers, increasing numbers coming into their peak spending at 46. There was a 46-year lag on the birth index, for crying out loud. How complicated is that? But how powerful was that? I mean, my criticism when I started speaking in the mid to late 80s, mostly to small businesses, because big corporations would have never hired an unknown like me back then. People are like, Harry, you're too optimistic. What's wrong with you? Don't you realize Japan's kicking our ass? That we just came out of 12 years of inflationary recession off and on. We're a has-been country. We're setting sun. Don't you get it? And then, of course, we had the greatest boom in history, and everybody did well, which is something we won't see in the future as much. I'll go into a bit, but the U.S. came back and led that boom. I could see it because we had one of the strongest baby boom generations, okay? And the reason I was looking at the baby boom was because I went from Fortune 100 consulting after Harvard Business School, which was boring because the companies were boring, big but boring, to doing the same strategic and turnaround management for new ventures in California. And they were exciting, but their customers were not the old Bob Hope generation of the past. They were the new baby boomers when they were young and just innovating and starting trends. So by studying the boomers for my new venture clients and some of the new ventures, I was CEO of 6 different companies for extended periods of time, in addition to consulting. I had to study the baby boomers, and that's when I saw, oh my God, a mountain of people, much bigger than the generation before them, the Bob Hope generation, I call it, much bigger than the millennial generation, relatively, even though it's higher numbers of births and all that stuff, but relatively much bigger. This generation is going to create the greatest boom in history, and everybody in America and in Europe is kind of bearish and thinks we don't have a lot of potential and the future belongs to Japan and Asia, and that is true also. So that's where I come from. I quit economics. That's the best decision I ever made. The boredom tripped me off, and my finance professor got me in the right direction, and I studied everything in business. And again, I worked as in a large corporation for 2 years before Harvard Business School, after college, because I had to do that to get into Harvard Business School. That's the only reason I did it, okay? They said you had to get work experience and get good recommendations to get in Harvard Business School. It's hard, you know? So come out of that, consult the Fortune 100 companies. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Bain & Company, super company, still is today. We're consulting to the largest companies in the world in business strategy. And I didn't realize, no, we're in the turnaround management business. The companies that come to Bain & Company and BCG and McKinsey are ones that are in trouble. The ones that are doing fine are just coasting along. But remember what I say, failure fosters change and innovation. Success makes you more complacent and even arrogant at times. Okay? So that's how I kind of got in this. My new venture clients opened me up to a whole new realm of operating, innovation, high growth, appealing to a whole new generation, the baby boomers. And the more I looked in that, the more I discovered, oh my gosh, for the first time in history, literally first time in history, in the early 80s, 1981 was the first time the United States Bureau of Labor did their first survey of consumers from cradle to grave, what they spend. This is golden information that most people still don't know exists, and I didn't know that until I had to do research and trip on it. Know exactly when we earn and spend money. And I can get this information around the world, especially in developed countries. So it allowed me to see, okay, what really drives the economy, politics is the least, as long as they're not adverse or evil dictators sort of stuff, okay? It is new generations moving up a predictable spending curve as they age and get smarter and have the motivation to earn more, if there's no other reason, because their kids need to be raised and sent to good schools and all this sort of stuff. And I used to think it was the same cycle, and on a different cycle, that's a 40-year cycle, by the way, new generations, and this is well known, it's quoted in the Bible, 40-year generation cycle, by the way. 45 years, I found later, technology cycles are on a slightly different clock, new technologies, like TVs and radios, we take that for granted. That was a breakthrough of all time back then. You know how boring life was before TVs and radios, and then the jet engine opened up the world on top of TV, and globalization. That's why globalization is so big and continues to be. And then there's the personal computer, microcomputer revolution. Oh my God, a supercomputer, as Steve Jobs said right at the beginning of the 70s, in your hands? He said that, and it happened a decade later. And he was the head of that. So Technological innovation, 45-year cycles. Gerald mentioned geopolitical cycle. That's another. When the geopolitics are tight, the world kind of clams up. People get fearful. Okay, that's a 35-year cycle. 17 to 18 years, good. 17 to 18 years, not so good. We are frankly in a positive geopolitical cycle just started, but we're in the tail end of a very negative demographic generational cycle of spending